there's something in the water, there's something in the wind, but the hard fact is that women are succeeding at a time when men generally are not. Apparently 82% of all the people who were pink-slipped in the last economic recession were males, primarily in those fading industries, the smokestack industries, construction, and so on. And so if you look around and you cite the high level of female education, 60% of all new entrants in universities in the Western world are females, declining marriage rates, the recent rise of the female billionaires and the female politicians that we've witnessed just a few days ago in California. It appears as if the era of male dominance is coming to an end. So, our next speaker, Christina Sommers from the American Enterprise Institute, is not entirely sure that this is a good idea. How are you, Christina?
Nice to see you. Good morning. Christina Hoff Sommers from the American Enterprise Institute. And I'm just going to say a word or two about where the boys are. I'll begin with just a story that I saw in the New York Times a few years back, which said, troubling title for Hispanics, girls most likely to drop out. And it was a front page story, and then you read further in the paper, and it was illustrated with charts and graphs and showing the plight of Hispanic girls in school. But buried in paragraph 6 was this line: the only group more likely to drop out are Hispanic boys. It said 31% dropout. I just thought this was so curious. So I called up the reporter, Dana Kennedy at the New York Times, and I asked her about the logic of an article which was dramatizing the plight of girls, Hispanic girls in this case, and when the boys were at more severe risk. And she said, and she had a good explanation. She said the American Association of University Women had done a study called Latinas in School, and she was simply writing about that, and she was sure that eventually there would be a study about Hispanic boys, and there'd be an article. Well, a few years have passed, no such article has materialized. And what I think is that, there's no American Association of University Men that's going to produce a study about Latinos in school. It's not going to happen. And yet boys are at greater risk academically, not simply in the Hispanic community, but across all ethnic lines. The boys are on the wrong side of the gender gap in education. And I think that what happened in the New York Times is emblematic of what's happening with boys in education in general and socially as well, is, as I said, they're increasingly suffering serious deficits, and yet they get very little attention. Now, the good news is that newspapers are beginning in the United States and a little bit in Canada. There are more stories now about the academic failings of boys, and we see just more information. And you learn, for example, what's true in the United States is true here, that there is a literacy gap favoring girls, which could best be described as a chasm. One statistic that sticks out in my mind is that in the United States, the 17-year-old boy has the writing skills of a 13-year-old girl. And the reading gap, they're about a year and a half behind. Boys in both Canada and the United States are far more likely to drop out. They do less homework, they're less engaged, they're simply not focused on education in the way girls are, and it shows up most acutely in college matriculation. And when I check the statistics in Canada, I will tell you, you lead the world, I think, in having more females graduating from university percentage is 61%. And you just go back a few years, you go back to 1996, 97, you already saw the girls moving ahead, and but then it was 56%. Something's happened now, it's 61%. I don't know about Canadian projections, but in the United States, they see it getting worse and worse. And that one expert in education quipped, only half jokingly, but by the year 2068, the last male will graduate from college. So the question is, what do we do? to turn things around. And I guess if I were to say, a big problem that we face is that I said before, there aren't organizations doing research on boys. There are vast numbers of groups doing research on women and girls. And I think it's this structural asymmetry between organizations for women and those for men that is a huge problem. And just let me explain that it was absolutely the case that women were the second sex in the United States and Canada in the 50s and the 60s. We needed those organizations, the National Organization for Women and the Canadian Federation of University Women, the American Association of University Women. In the United States alone, there are 116 think tanks and research centers, and this isn't even counting women's studies departments, and they're in something called the Council for Research on Women, and they sort of scour the landscape. If there's any way in which women are ever so slightly disadvantaged or behind, or there's anything in which they think women could be strengthened, they put all their efforts. And many of these efforts have been amazingly successful, admirable, and girls are soaring. We see girls participating in sports at levels never seen before, and we see the college matriculation and just winning the honors. And if you look even in the professions, there are certain fields, veterinary medicine, it used to be almost all men. Now it's female-dominated. Fields like psychology, the humanities, women are getting more of the degrees, and the social sciences, and many of the sciences moving ahead. Now there are 2 or 3 areas where you'll still find more males in engineering and in the math-based, the physical sciences. And so we have this large network, this organizations in the United States working to find out why that's happening and to undo it. And that's fine. I'm not going to be critical of that, but I simply wonder, where are the groups addressing the literacy gap, the graduation gap, the homework gap, the commitment to school gap, that is going to so many young men are going to be caught in this cohort, this growing cohort, that will not find a place in an information economy. Now, the problem with the women's groups is not just that there's the disparate number of people and groups, one side for girls and women, and really nothing for boys and men. These organizations are very suspicious. If you start talking about the needs of boys, they think that it's part of a backlash. And they become very defensive. And I've written and urged them to realize that if boys are in trouble, that is a women's issue. These are the young men, our daughters, these are our sons, and these are our the young men, our daughters and granddaughters are going to build a future with whom they're going to build the future. So if boys are in trouble, so are we all. And so now there are, if you look at gender studies department and departments of education, they are making efforts to study boys, but what worries me is that a lot of it is based on this idea that that somehow masculinity is pathological, something the boys need to be rescued from. And they have all sorts of programs to calm them down and actually to make them behave less boyishly, if you will. The typical play of little boys is called rough and tumble play. It involves a lot of sound effects and bam, boom, and it is the healthy, natural play of young males everywhere. And girls do it too, but not nearly as much. And increasingly, teachers and parents are uncomfortable with it. They can't distinguish it from violence. It's very different from violence. When boys are being violent, there's unhappiness, and they're part as enemies. They're often, with little boys, it's tearful. When boys are rough and tumbling, it's just the opposite. They're forming important social bonds, and they're learning, and it's the healthy development of natural development of boys. And yet in our schoolyards in the United States and in Canada, increasingly, I think we're a little more carried away in the States with this, but there are rules against dodgeball and rules against playing tag. They've tried to replace it. There were these guidebooks on how to calm the children down, and one of them suggested playing Circle of Friends. It's a way to play tag where no one is ever out. If there's any way to alienate a boy, they also have, instead of tug of war, they recommend tug of peace and so forth. And just another example of the, I don't want to say feminization of education, that's too strong, but I think that's what I mean. And my son, his high school class went camping in the desert, and he had a great time, but he came back and there was just one activity he really didn't like, and I said, what was it? And he said, well, this sort of, it's a creative writing sensitivity educator or something came to the camp, and all the kids were supposed to sort of walk into the desert at dusk with, and she gave them a candle and a notebook and a pencil and matches, and they were just supposed to go and light the candle and write their thoughts, their feelings, and about what they saw and the stark loneliness of the desert or something. Anyway, the girls all did as told, and they went out and they started writing, and the boys, almost without exception, just kind of looked at each other, gathered together, threw the notebooks into a pile with the pencils, and made a bonfire. And I said, well, well, they were all in trouble, and the sensitivity educator thought that they were like proto-arsonists and sociopaths, and they were just anguished. And I just heard this, and again, having written so much and studied so much about boys, I just saw this is, again, emblematic, not only ignored, but when we pay attention, it's sort of the wrong kind of attention. And on a more serious level, even what is the readings that are assigned in classrooms, a lot of fiction when boys, I'm speaking generally and just average, there are always boys that will defy the average, but typically boys like adventure stories, especially little boys, books about things, and they're the one group of human beings in the Northern Hemisphere that don't want to sit around and talk about their feelings very much, but there are other ways to reach them. But a friend of mine, Sandra Stotsky, she was at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and she did a content analysis of, I think it was 7th or 8th grade history books, social studies books, and she said you would come away from those books thinking that the American West was settled by teenage girls traveling with parents. And that it was... So, just increasingly, I find the schools sort of centered around the needs of girls, and the girls are flourishing. And I don't want to take anything away from them. But before... that we were talking about Hollywood, and I think of The Simpsons with Bart and Lisa. And in one episode, Lisa Simpson, I think she has a dream, and she's projecting herself into the future. It's 2013. She's at Yale University. They no longer allow males to take math and science because they were too threatening to the females. They pushed them out, and they've changed it to they don't have algebra. They have galgebra, and they have. This sort of thing. Anyway, now, I don't think anything that severe. I don't project anything like that. You do find in some women's studies departments a sort of women are from Venus, men are from hell philosophy. But I don't see anything going on like in The Simpsons. However, although I did have a colleague who wanted to offer instead of seminars, she offered ovulars. She thought that was the female equivalent, but anyway, forget it. She wasn't joking either. She was serious about that. But anyway, I'm just concerned that there's this philosophy that's somewhat hostile to young men, and that we do have schools that are increasingly directed towards the needs and interests of girls, and we've got to find our way back to common sense. We've got to accept the fact that girls and boys, men and women, are not the same. We can be different but equal. I think that's the philosophy that should inform social policy. But what we have now is something very different. We have policies that are based on, I think, very, very negative evaluation of males. And it goes from indifference to the wrong kind of attention. And so what I suggest is, and again, I said before, I don't want to take anything away from young women. I think we actually should study what the women's groups did. We should learn from it, where they did the right thing. We should imitate it. But a lot of that activism was based on respect for girls and heartfelt commitment to helping them thrive and flourish. And I think we should do the same with boys. I think it should be based on respectful appreciation of who they are. And I'm not saying boys should be boys. Boys must be gentlemen. But there are ways of educating a boy and bringing out the best in him, which don't entail making him more like a girl. You can respect his young manhood and at the same time have a civilizing influence. So as I said, I think we have to do this out of respect for who they are, and we have to see what did we do for girls, what worked. Let's do the same for boys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. That was lovely.